Good afternoon and welcome to the CERIAS Security Seminar from Purdue University. Our speaker today is Professor Paul Thompson from Dartmouth College. He's going to talk about the Durkheim Project, which is about privacy considerations in predicting military and veteran suicide risk. Paul, thank you.
Okay. Hello, it's good to be here at CERIAS again. I'll start by talking about the Durkheim Project, which was a project that I've been working on with a number of colleagues over the last 2 years. And when I arranged to come out here, Eugene Spafford mentioned there was particular interest in some of the privacy issues related to the project. And I also share that interest. So towards the end of the talk, I'll focus on that. And I encourage you to ask questions anytime, whether it's in the middle or at the end. As Randy mentioned, I'm at Dartmouth College. I'm currently at the medical school. So Durkheim was one of the founders of the field of sociology, and we named this project in honor of him, Emil Durkheim, because he had done some work on language analysis in a book he wrote back in 1897. So in our project, we've put together a group of people with various backgrounds, including machine learning and natural language understanding, text understanding, or computational linguistics, and also medical experts such as psychiatrists. So this project started in the summer of 2011, and our funding for the project ended this spring, although some of the other groups who are part of the larger program, which is called Detection and Computational Analysis of Psychological Signals, are still working for another year or so, and they're going through an evaluation phase. Our software has been integrated with other companies so we will be evaluated as part of that evaluation of their software. So this is providing some of the context. 50 to 66% of individuals who die by suicide never mention that they or deny that they have any intent for suicide. And some of the highest risk individuals are also often missed because their intent often fluctuates widely. And so in this project, our original idea was to try to use social media, like blog postings on software such as, or products such as Facebook, to try to predict suicide risk. Although, as you'll see as I get more into the talk, so far we've mostly focused on doing a study of U.S. Veterans Affairs medical records of veterans who have completed suicide and comparing those records to records of people who either were in for some kind of psychiatric visit at a Veterans Affairs hospital or a control group. So our goal was to try to predict, try to determine if, based on that analysis of the medical record, we could predict which ones would commit or complete suicide or not. So in one particular pilot study, this is a different study, 65% of the suicide military personnel that had been in mental health treatment looked suicidal, even though they denied any suicide ideation. So this graph explains some of this, like the people who actually completed suicide or didn't complete suicide, and whether they looked suicidal or not. So true positives or true negatives. And this isn't our say. This is just some background information. So in terms of this predicting based on postings with social media such as Facebook or LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on, our view is that opting in is very critical. That some studies are done where some of what's on the social media websites, such as Facebook, anybody can access that. That's publicly available data. And we, on the other hand, only wanted to work with people that knew that they were taking part in this study. So we have opt-in, and we don't, have some kind of tricky user license agreements or EULA to, try to deceive people into taking part in this study. So at this point, our initial study is just an observational study. So we're just asking for people to opt in to take part in the study. We're not, planning any intervention if it looks like someone is suicidal. Although, as I'll mention more later, we currently have a pending protocol that's being reviewed by an institutional review board that would allow us to develop an intervention plan for people. So the technical problem for this is building a system that's able to collect all this data, store it, and analyze it, and allow clinicians to be able to react, and doing this on a scale where, say, we might hypothetically over time have 100,000 people who have opted in to take part in this study. So, it's really a big data problem. And in real time, how could you monitor all these postings and be able to predict that there is some suicide risk? And this slide sort of shows a high-level diagram where there's someone who has opted in and is providing their postings, and a medical database which is behind a firewall and is HIPAA compliant, and then a predictive model that's working with that data and providing input to a clinician's dashboard. And again, there will be more about this later, but the way our opt-in works is we have partnered with Facebook on this project. So through their advertising or marketing, they know various populations. So they know who is in the military or who is a veteran, and we are only giving opt-in screens to those people to opt into our study. So I'll go into a little more detail about the technical architecture for this, how the data is collected and stored, and the machine learning algorithms that are used, and how we will scale this up, and ultimately we hope to provide automated intervention. So this is an example of what the opt-in screen looks like, and this is an important aspect of our privacy control, because again, we're not doing any of this without a person's knowledge that their opt-in postings are being collected. They have volunteered to take part in this study, and later, if we do get IRB approval for the intervention protocol, then we will go back to all of these people who have already opted in to be observed and say, well, now we're doing this intervention study. Are you willing to opt in to this additional study? But we wouldn't just use the people who had opted in already. And so this enables a level of privacy. And but as I'll talk about later, as far, from my perspective, privacy is more complicated than just that you've opted in, you've given consent to be part of a study, or that all the legal points have been addressed. I mean, I think there's also, especially in a study like this, many ethical considerations as well as strictly legal considerations. So, in this cloud, it shows there's all these social media activity going on, and then there's a Gigya commercial service, a content aggregator that collects this data, puts it in a sort of big data database, Cassandra, and then we've as part of this project we've built an app for Facebook, or also like for the iPhone or for Androids, to be able to interface with the social media, and so then all of this information from the opt-in postings will be collected and stored in a database behind the firewall at the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth, where I'm an employee. And this is just a little more technical detail just about how we're going to be able to scale up, handle this potentially 100,000 people that are providing their opt-in postings. And so this is taking place in real time. I believe every 30 seconds it's updating for each person who's opted in, and collecting their latest posts or people that have written to their Facebook wall. And as I mentioned, this is then stored behind HIPAA-compliant firewall. So are all of you familiar with HIPAA? Right. And then, potentially, it's possible to de-identify data that could then be used by other researchers. So far, we haven't done any of that. I mean, all of our data has stayed behind the firewall. And, we're just gathering the Facebook data, as I'll talk more about later. We have done a Veterans of Affairs medical record study, which has remained behind the firewall. So during this project in 2011, as part of our project with DARPA, the Detection and Computational Analysis of Psychological Signals project, we funded another subcontract with the Veterans of Affairs to study 3 cohorts. And our original plan, or the protocol that was approved by our Committee for the Protection of Human Subjects at Dartmouth, was to create 3 cohorts, or groups of people for the study. So one group would be people that we know had taken their lives in 2009, and this data comes from the Centers for Disease Control. And the data we needed to assemble this data set were the Social Security numbers of the people who had taken their lives. And then we wanted to compare that group to a group of patients who had come to the Veteran Affairs Hospital for some kind of psychiatric-related services. And then we'd have another group of 100 patients who had been at the VA, but not for psychiatric-related services. And we did have some problems with this data in that of the 100 people that had completed suicide, only about 69 or 70 had actually ever come to a VA. So there was no VA medical record for a fair percentage of those people. So we had to redesign our study to take that into account. And we developed a linguistic approach to try to estimate the risk of suicide. And so we generated these predictive models from the unstructured clinical notes in the medical record. So the medical record contained a lot of other data, which structured information such as what drugs were prescribed, or things like blood pressure or something like that, and like lab tests that were done. But and of course in a sort of more thoroughly developed system, you would want to take all of that kind of information into account in predicting risk as well. But in our case, we limited our predictive model to just looking at the narrative or free text portions of the medical record. So these were notes that were written by healthcare providers like psychiatrists or psychologists, nurses, or other healthcare providers. And in part because we had a delay in getting our data. We were supposed to have gotten our data about a year ago in like August last summer, and the Social Security numbers, which would allow us to create the data sets. But we didn't actually receive those Social Security numbers till mid-November. Our project was supposed to be completed by the end of December, so we didn't have a lot of time to develop very elaborate models. But so we ended up just looking at individual words, or in some cases multi-word phrases, as our data. And as a computational linguist, I would have liked to have done much more with that. But given the time, that was mostly what we could do. On the other hand, we had use of some, I think, very sophisticated machine learning models that we applied to that data. And we were able to predict, or sort of classify or accurately predict to which of these three groups someone belonged based on this analysis with 65% accuracy. And that might not seem very accurate, but that actually compares fairly well with the risk prediction that's been available in this area, but using other means. So like on the second slide or so, which I'll go back to here if I can easily go back, I'm not sure. Right, so this, so this is the National Center for Veteran Studies at the University of Utah pilot data, where they were also looking at a figure of 65%. It's not quite the same thing, but I've been told by the psychiatrists we worked with on this project that this is typically a fairly good prediction accuracy, and again this was based with a very simple linguistic model. And so here, sort of a lot of information in this graphic, but these are comparing two different groups, and so these gray bars are single words, the yellow bars are word pairs, then word triplets, dark blue bars, and phrases are the sort of light green bars. And this shows the sort of varying levels of the sort of mean or average accuracy given. And in this case, none of the scores were quite up to 65%, but some of them were pretty close, like 63% or 62%. And this looks at some more specific features. So these were words that were accurate in distinguishing the three cohorts. And so the red terms are words that were associated by the positive, suicide-positive cohort. So words like agitation or frightening and Demerol, a particular medication. Whereas the yellow terms are from the psychiatric non-suicidal control group. So these were people that had been in for mental health-related visits, but they weren't, the people who had taken their lives. And so there you had words like disheveled, preoccupied, and presbyopia, which I'm not sure what that means. But again, these are not words coming from the patient. These are words coming from the healthcare provider. And in some cases, they might be, describing in their notes something that the patient said. And then when I talk later about the Facebook study we're trying to do, there is a gap between, the types of text we're using. So on the one hand, using text written about a patient by a healthcare provider, in the other hand, trying to use text, actually written by the person who may or may not be suicidal. And so that's a pretty major issue, which we haven't addressed yet. But the thought is that the sort of predictive model that could be built with these words by the healthcare providers could, in some sense, transfer over to things that people are writing about. So, somebody might say they're agitated, but this we haven't really tested yet. And so, Facebook has a lot of its own data internally, and so part of our agreement with Facebook is they're going to take the predictive model that we've built and apply it to their internal data. So that would be looking more retrospectively in the past, although going forward we're collaborating with Facebook on this kind of research. Oh, I guess I didn't mention the other green terms, which are from the control group. So those were the people who had been in the VA, but not for psychiatric-related reasons. And so, terms like anorexia or arthralgia or myalgia are good words that help pick out that group as compared to the other two groups. And neither the PI of this project nor myself are psychologists or psychiatrists, and we're not domain experts. But the psychiatrists that we were working with on this project at Dartmouth and the White River, Vermont Veterans Affairs Medical Center say that this makes sense to them. These are, like agitation, frightening, demerol, are words that make sense as good features. So for this detection computational analysis of psychological signals program, our final deliverable was this software infrastructure that we built to do this opt-in prediction through social media, as well as the VA Veterans of Affairs medical record study and the machine learning classifier that worked with that. So we worked with Cloudera, which are any of you familiar with Cloudera? Right. So could you say what it is?
Sure. They have a distribution of Hadoop and HBase that they produce that allows you to kind of just install it like a software package and produce its amount of computation.
Right, and could you explain Hadoop?
Oh, sure.
I'm sorry, could you please use your microphone? Thank you.
Hadoop is a distributed processing and storage framework.
Right. Okay, so Hadoop is an algorithm that is used for machine learning, and it's an open source version of the proprietary Google MapReduce software algorithm. So it's used a lot in big data. So it's a way that you can break up a problem into two parts, the mapping and the reducing, and do very large scale machine learning. So Cloudera is I guess the leading company that makes this available to many people use Cloudera services, including us on this project. So we were able to build this infrastructure and delivered it before our funding ended in spring of 2013. So I guess another one of these open source sort of machine learning environments is something called Mahout, I think, or is that a correct pronunciation? Maybe I've heard it's Mahout also. But we, rather than using that, used our own environment that we developed on this project and an earlier meta-learning project. Meta-learning being the idea that a lot of machine learning, in our view, is fairly ad hoc. So people, just try out whatever algorithm they have available or is popular, and see what kind of results they get. But with meta-learning, the idea is that for a given data set, how could you, know more scientifically what would be the right algorithm or type of algorithms or parameter settings that would be useful to use with that data set? So we had some of the same people that worked on this project were part of an earlier project where we were funded to explore this idea of meta-learning. So we used some of the same software infrastructure for machine learning that we built on that project. And eventually we want this prediction library to be open source with an Apache license that could be available through the community. And then since we're doing these sort of big data real-time sort of prediction, we also want to be able to have a good trade-off between the sort of real-time runtime but also still be accurate. And so there's another group we worked with called B-Counts that provides distributed Bayesian learning, and the person we interacted with on that was Alex Kozlov, and there's a website that goes into more about that. And so as an example of this trade-off, like, I guess there's a saying in advertising, which of course is what is behind a lot of the web, companies like, say, Google or something like that, that if you don't find out what the user wants in 5 minutes, you lose the user. So similarly, in intrusion detection, if you don't detect it right away, there may be significant damage. And similarly, in a project like this, I mean, if someone is really at risk, you want to be able to, get this information to act on quickly. So on July 2nd, in this July, we officially launched this second part of our project, the part with Facebook. And so by that time, we had got the IRB approval for our protocol. And there's a URL for the press release that came out with the joint press release with Facebook and VEREN, which is the Northern New England research arm of the Veterans Affairs. And this has been fairly widely reported in the media since then, like on NPR or most recently CNN. And as I mentioned earlier, we're now moving, we almost have completed our protocol for providing intervention. So if you were able to predict suicide risk, but then you didn't do anything, that doesn't seem right. So we're working on intervention strategy that would include various types of intervention. So on the one hand, a person who opts in for the intervention study who might be in the military or could be a veteran could indicate someone who was their buddy or person that they'd want to know about it if they were feeling suicidal, or it could be a family member or some other friend. And if a person did have a clinician that they were working with, like they could send their postings to the clinician, or in another scenario, there are various 800 number hotlines, like the Canandaigua, New York Veterans Affairs has a Center of Excellence for Suicide Prevention, which has a national hotline 800 number. And we're also working on something called safety plan narratives. So, various suicide researchers have worked out safety plans, or things that you could recommend that you do, and there'll be more on this in another slide. But so we're considering these various possibilities, and including something that if there's nobody, there's no clinician, there's no friend or family. I mean, even some kind of automated intervention. And so this shows a sort of time series of you might someone who is considering suicide. It means there's an ideation, they're thinking about it. But of course, many people who think about it never do attempt suicide. And so you may see this in some blog postings. There could be repeated ideation as a next step, not just a single occurrence of that. And then, as you're getting closer to a possible attempt at suicide, you might have, time for intervention, or then you might get to a point where there's very limited time for intervention, or, an actual negative event. So we're trying to figure out, sort of how to monitor what's going along this time series. So as I've said, we're hoping this month to have our protocol submitted, and we're submitting it to a commercial IRB, so we expect to have a fairly quick turnaround on that. We are continuing to develop improvements in our data collection. So currently, this project is not funded. We're also hoping to find additional funding. One of the motivations of our press release was hoping that might make foundation funding more accessible to us. And we're working with Facebook on targeted demographic recruitment, which I've already mentioned. In other words, through their marketing, they know who's in the military, who's a veteran, and so on. So, we've done some of that already. We have got some opt-in, people who've opted in already. But we're going to do another round of that, and we're identifying different partners, such as the Veterans Affairs or the National Center that I mentioned for Veteran Studies at the University of Utah, to work with on the intervention. Okay, that is just a description of the project. And then coming to the privacy issues, and here I would definitely encourage more open-ended discussion if you have any thoughts on this, because a lot of this, I think even security researchers tend to focus on, the technical aspects of security or privacy, or the legal aspects. But as I was saying earlier, I think there are broader ethical and other aspects to it, and there's a difference in just doing an observational study or analyzing medical records like we've done so far, versus something like that we're planning to do with Facebook, where we're actually planning to intervene. So I think there are a lot of very broad issues in using social media data. And as you might imagine, just as social media has become so popular, the idea of using social media as a way to predict health outcomes has become of great interest, especially in the area of public health. And I was at NIH a few weeks ago, and I talked to some people involved with National Institute for Mental Health, or the one person who's involved with I guess NIH has an internal graduate school, and so I talked to the person who's in the Department of Public Health there, and they were saying, like, this is one of the holy grails of public health, to be able to effectively use social media. But on the other hand, for public health purposes, it's maybe 98% garbage and 2% of it's useful. But it's a very difficult signal noise problem. And again, the difference between like a therapist talking to a patient face to face in an appointment, versus a patient interacting in social media, and maybe the clinician seeing some postings or some analysis coming in through social media that this patient is at risk, or maybe you could click on that and see, well, this is what the actual posting is. And I know in talking to some psychiatrists that they feel like the psychiatric system is very overburdened at present. I mean, there aren't enough providers to deal with the patients they have already, let alone if we start bringing in more sources of data. So it becomes a fairly complicated triage problem. But I think if we could accurately detect some signal in this social media, that it could be useful, very useful, as part of this triage. And like even in our study with the medical records, 30 or so of those people never had come to the VA at all, who had taken their lives. So in looking into the privacy aspects of this, I had contacted different organizations, or like privacy experts related to healthcare, and one of the documents I was given was an open letter that all these organizations listed here had written to Mark Zuckerberg in June 2010, so this is in particular the let's see, I'm not even sure if the group is listed here, but in any case, that I was talking to, but so this is sort of the content of the letter. Just sort of these 6 points they wanted Facebook to at that time back in 2010 to address, to fix the app gap. In other words, let users decide exactly which applications can access their personal information. So a lot of this, and as you'll see in the next document I show, that Facebook has been accused of deceptive practices in their their sort of sign-on process and this kind of thing for these various things. And make instant personalization and opt-in by default. So are any of you Facebook users? Does all of this sound familiar to you? I'm not a very active Facebook user myself, so some of this is more just sort of a technical study for me. But then they were asking Facebook not to retain data about specific visitors to third-party sites that have social plugins or have likes. So if you click on like in some third-party site, then all this data gets aggregated and used everywhere, unless the user chooses that interaction, that they want that, which many users quite possibly do want. And then they want to have the users have control over every piece of information they share via Facebook, including name, gender, profile, picture, and networks, to make HTTPS, secure HTTP for all interactions be the default. And then if somebody decided they didn't want to be part of Facebook anymore, to provide tools to allow that person to export all of their content from Facebook to another social media provider. So could any of you tell me of your experiences with Facebook along the lines of any of these points, or do you have any positive or negative experiences? Yes.
All those things are currently there.
Excuse me?
All your points right now are currently there. You are currently able to do.
Right. So they've corrected those, you're saying?
Yeah.
Right. And that's what, so I talked to the attorney who gave me this open letter, and she did indicate that most of those have been addressed by now. So anyone else?
I was just going to say that even if you leave Facebook, your stuff is still there.
Right.
I mean,
right.
I used to supervise people on parole.
Yes.
And I would go back to Facebook pages after they got in trouble. They'd shut their Facebook page down. I could still go back and look at it and check their friends and check their postings. It doesn't go anywhere. It's still there.
Right.
So it is something. I mean, there's something there that can be looked at.
Right. Okay. And the attorney said she would, try to get back to me before the presentation today to give me the latest on all this, but I didn't hear from her yet. But then more recently, just last summer, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission filed a complaint against Facebook for their deceptive, various deceptive activities. And again, I don't know the very latest on this, to what extent it's been addressed or not. But so they were accused of having deceptive privacy settings and the unfair and deceptive 2009 privacy changes, and then the scope of the platform application's access to Facebook users' information, disclosure of user information to advertisers, and a deceptive verified apps program. And there's a little more detail on some of this, but the rest of it was disclosure of user photos and videos. And then there's this U.S. European Union Safe Harbor framework. And again, the attorney told me that many of these issues have now been addressed, but I don't know the exact status of all of this. But, I guess I didn't have more details. So the Safe Harbor idea is that, there's some, sort of basic minimum things you can do to satisfy, certain privacy issues, which like the European Union has, and Facebook signed an agreement saying, yes, we do all this, but in fact, at least as of a year ago, according to the Federal Trade Commission, they weren't actually doing that. But again, it's possible that a lot of this has been addressed. Anybody have a comment on that or familiar with any of these specific issues? Okay. So we had a pretty large team of people working on this, and a lot of these people were part-time. Chris Poulin was the principal investigator who has a small business called Patterns and Predictions. I was the co-principal investigator on the project. Tom McAllister was a traumatic brain injury psychiatrist at Dartmouth at the time, although since then he's become the chair of the Department of Psychiatry at Indiana University, so he's in Indianapolis now. Ben Durzel's AI programmer. Brian Shiner is a psychologist at the University of Utah, the National Center for Veteran Studies. Linus Vepstas was our lead machine learning programmer, and a number of other people working on the project. And in terms of the privacy discussion, In 2008, I was invited to take part in an IBM deep dive on security and society. And there were, I don't know, about 20 of us, I think, including an attorney who was the chief privacy officer of Facebook at the time, although I think he left shortly after that. I've also discussed this with Perry Aftab, who's an internet attorney who is also on advisory board at Facebook. Diane Lambert, who organized a user-centered modeling workshop at the University of Minnesota that I attended a little over a year ago. Carrie Loreno is the veterans advocate at Google. Devin McGraw is the woman who had given me the 2 documents. I talked about the FTC complaints and the open letter, who is the director of the Health Privacy Project at the Center for Democracy and Technology in Washington, D.C. I'm also a member of the Sedona Conference Working Group 1 on electronic document retention and production and part of their healthcare drafting team. This is primarily a group of attorneys and judges, and I am neither of those, but I used to work in legal publishing, so I've been part of that group. And Rob Bossart is the chief epidemiologist at the Canandaigua, New York VA Center of Excellence for Suicide Prevention. I mentioned Craig Bryan already, associate director of the National Center, University of Utah. And Jane Pearson is at the NIH, National Institute of Mental Health, the chair of the Suicide Research Consortium. And I think that's it. So, any other questions? Comments? Privacy issues? Yes?
Were there any reasons other than speed that you went with the commercial IRB as opposed to, I assume, Dartmouth has one?
Not really. I mean, we considered it on our first 2 protocols, and because we were working with Facebook, I guess that's typical, like involving companies to work with commercial IRBs. I think, part of it was also because the Tom McAllister, who had been the lead PI for Dartmouth for the project, left to Indiana University, so, and the funding had ended, so I don't think they would have, analyzed our protocol without us currently having a project. So, other questions or comments? And I think this sort of social media approach is generalizable to other areas, not just suicide risk prediction, but other mental health illnesses, or there's some of the people we worked with are interested in, I think it's the quantified self movement, having sensors that monitor everything going on physiologically, your exercise, your eating, your sleeping, and measuring that in the context of cohorts of other people doing that. So as I think I said earlier, we were given the choice in this project of either developing, maybe I didn't mention this, but some of the other people working on, groups working on this project were doing what's called reality analysis. So you have the sensors that are monitoring what's going on in real time and making predictions based on that, whereas the other choice was to do a clinician's dashboard, and we ended up doing the clinician's dashboard. So this general area is called mobile health, which you're probably familiar with. Okay, I guess if there are no more questions, we can formally end, but if any of you want to talk to me afterwards, that's fine too. Okay.